Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Influential Motherhood Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Duncan, and as a mom and lawyer, I want to be a cheerleader for moms who don't want to give up their own goals and dreams. Around here, we celebrate moms who are making a difference and talk about ways to juggle work, motherhood, goals, faith, self-care, and more. I'm so glad you're here. The only filters we use around here are coffee filters, so pour yourself a cup and enjoy the show. On today's episode of Influential Motherhood, I'm honored to bring you another really important advocacy episode with an amazing mom who has just poured her heart and soul into her work. And so I'm here with Cerise Murata, and she is the COO of Families Fighting Flu, which is an organization that provides information and resources and advocacy for the flu vaccine and just prevention and treatment for children and families. And they really highlight the risks and the ways that you can help your family try to prevent those risks with the flu. And her story is heartbreaking. And at the same time, I'm grateful that she's used it as a way to help other families. So Cerise, welcome to the Influential Motherhood Podcast.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, we definitely appreciate it, and I know just from the chatting that we've done so far that you're going to provide a lot of really valuable information as we enter the flu season for the year. So tell us a little bit more about you and just kind of who you are and a little bit about your family.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I am currently the Chief Operating Officer for a national nonprofit organization called Families Fighting Flu. And I came to the organization back in 2010 after my healthy 5-year-old son Joseph passed away from the flu in 2009. So obviously, as a result of that experience, wanted to educate others about influenza and how dangerous it can be. On the personal side, I am married. I have a now 17-year-old teenage daughter who is going to be going off to college next year, which I'm not sure I'm ready for. So
That's a big transition.
Exactly. But I will say flu education and advocacy has definitely consumed my life for the past 3 years, since I have been on staff at Families Fighting Flu. And this October, it will be 10 years since my son passed away, which seems like yesterday, but forever ago, all at the same time. So obviously just still trying to educate people. There's still so many people we need to reach.
Absolutely. Well, I want to reiterate again how sorry I am for your loss and your family's loss. And just seeing the pictures of Joseph, you can tell what a little spark of light he was. And so I know that these past 10 years, I'm sure, have been harder than any of us could imagine. So just want to extend our condolences on his loss. So you mentioned that you got involved with Families Fighting Flu after the year after Joseph passed away. And it sounds like it's just been within the last 3 years that you've really kind of taken on the COO role. So after his passing in 2009, how did you become aware of the organization, and what was your initial involvement like?
Yeah, so actually Families Fighting Flu found me, which sometimes that works. It's a two-way street. Sometimes we find families, which we actively do outreach for, but sometimes families find us first. And that's what happened in my case. My son passed away in October 2009, and it was the spring of 2010. We lived in Dayton, Ohio at the time, and as can be expected, Joseph's death got a lot of media attention. That was during the H1N1 pandemic. And I had done a lot of local media interviews, and the executive director at that time of Families Fighting Flu commented on one of the postings. It was just a local TV station that had interviewed me, and she commented on the article, and my husband actually saw it, brought it to my attention. We immediately connected with her because before that we had never heard of the organization. And the organization actually started in 2004, and it was just, happenstance that we had not yet intersected with them. And so we quickly got on the phone with her, and it was really kind of just hit the ground running. I started volunteering. I had a full-time career at that point in time. I was an environmental scientist for 16 years. And I just started talking with her and saying, what can I do? Yeah. And at that point in time, there were a lot of speaking engagements that were going on. And so one of the first things that I started doing was attending local conferences here in the state of New York and just speaking at the conferences and sharing my story. And from there, I quickly was asked to be on the board of directors. So I was on the board for several years. And then tragically, our executive director passed away in 2015, and coincidentally, I ended up leaving my job as an environmental scientist, and the board asked me to come on staff in spring of 2016. So that was 3 years ago, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
Wow. What an amazing story. Just the way that, all of that kind of played out after the organization found you. So I think, the part of your story that probably caught all the moms, everybody who's listening, all the moms who are listening, probably caught their attention was when you said your healthy 5-year-old passed away from the flu. So can you tell us a little bit more about Joseph's story and what happened with his reaction to being infected with the flu? And I've read enough about it to kind of know there was a little bit of a perfect storm with there not being a vaccine available. And so tell us a little bit about kind of how that all played out.
Sure. Yeah, and you bring up an excellent point, and that's something I always try to stress is Joseph was healthy. And so many of the children and adults even, and seniors, people in general that are affected adversely by flu are otherwise healthy. The statistics for children alone, about 50% of the children that lose their lives to influenza are otherwise healthy. So Joseph
That's terrifying.
It is. It is
absolutely terrifying.
It is, and certainly I don't want to scare people. What I want to do is I want to educate them and empower them so that they can make that decision about flu vaccination for themselves and their families. I always tell people, look, I'm just giving you another piece of information. I'm sharing my story so that you know what I didn't, because I will tell you honestly, I was a protective parent. I still am. My teenage daughter will vouch for that. I'm an educated individual. I had no idea that flu was so dangerous. In fact, when Joseph passed away, I literally looked at the doctor in the emergency room, in the ICU, I should say, and I said, oh my God, he's got to be the first child to die from influenza. And she looked at me and said, he's the 85th child this year to die.
Oh my
I
goodness.
had no idea. So I never judge people for not knowing, because that's exactly where I was. So just to briefly share Joseph's story, he was 5 years old. He was attending kindergarten. He had just started kindergarten. And his illness started innocently enough. He threw up on the school bus, which he's our second child. And, and I think with the first one, the child throws up and you're freaking out and thinking, oh my gosh, the second one comes along and you're like, yeah, okay, it's fine. Yeah. Not to belittle it, but he threw up on the school bus. We went and picked him up, brought him home. And like I said, we were just kind of watching him and seeing, is this a stomach bug? What is this? Is this something we need to worry about? And so he was throwing up intermittently throughout the day. He's sleeping on the couch. What was really concerning with Joseph's case is he was really lethargic. And so eventually we called the pediatrician. It was after hours, so he told us to go to the urgent care. Took him to the urgent care. The nurse took one look at him and said, this kid's got the flu. They did a rapid test for the flu, which came back negative, which now we know at that particular point in time, the rapid tests were not super conclusive. So then they checked his blood oxygen level, and it was low. And they said, okay, he's got to go in the ambulance to the Children's Hospital. So we got to the Children's Hospital. That evening, they diagnosed him with pneumonia. Ran a bunch of tests, and so they started treating him for the pneumonia. He was in the ICU for a couple days on oxygen, started antibiotics, breathing treatments, the whole nine. Eventually downgraded him after a couple days to like the regular pediatric floor. And we were really just kind of going about our business. You know, it was a children's hospital. They were coming in, checking everything, you know, checking all of his systems, his heart, his lungs, his kidneys, you name it. We saw every specialist, I think, in that hospital. And for all intents and purposes, he was stable. I mean, there were certainly things, he still had a fever, he was still throwing up intermittently, but they were treating the pneumonia and we felt like everything was under control. A few days later, into his hospital stay, the doctor came in and said, well, this is the strangest thing. His culture is growing influenza. And of course, my immediate reaction was, oh my gosh, H1N1, because like I said, this was during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And the doctor said, you know, don't worry about it. We'll start treating him for the flu. Not a big deal. So fast forward, he was in the hospital a total of 9 days. He had kind of some ups and downs throughout the, you know, his stay, but again, relatively stable. We were talking about, you know, when we got discharged, how we were going to continue the breathing treatments. We were going to, you know, do all the things that, you know, you would do with that round of antibiotics, etc. The 9th day, his blood pressure plummeted very suddenly, and they did not know why. And it was very alarming, obviously. And we went back to the ICU, and that evening they were running all kinds of tests, but honestly, everything seemed to be in control. In fact, so much so that my husband left with our daughter at about 11:30 that night and said, okay, I'll be back in the morning. I mean, my husband never would have left if we didn't think Joseph was stable. So they continued doing a bunch of testing throughout the night. Could not resolve his blood pressure. So because his blood pressure was so low, his respiration and his heart rate were elevated. So about 6 a.m. the next morning, you know, here Joseph is being poked and prodded all night. He's awake, he's lucid, but he is not a happy 5-year-old. I mean, you know, he wants Gatorade, he wants to eat, he wants all these needles out of him because, of course, he's been on an IV for about 9 days at that point. And they came to me and said, you know, we want to make him comfortable. We're going to put him on a ventilator, but when we do so, he's going to be unconscious. So why don't you call your husband, have him come up, you know, again, not a big deal. He's stable right now. Nothing critical, but we just want to, you know, do our due diligence. So I very calmly called my husband, told him the news. He said, okay, no problem. I'll be up there. Got off the phone with my husband, and again, this was about, you know, 6 a.m. I was talking to Joseph. I was standing right next to his bed. We were talking about Halloween because it was October 18th. And of course, he's hooked up to all these machines, and we were talking about, you know, he loved Star Wars, and he was talking about, should I be a stormtrooper for Halloween, mommy, or, you know, something else? And all of a sudden he coded. And I tell people this story, and I'm like, you know, those hospital shows, that's exactly what it was like. Like, all these alarms went off, and all these nurses and doctors came rushing into Joseph's room. I obviously knew something was seriously wrong. I backed out of the room. I was waiting in the hallway, and they were working on him. They finally came and got me, brought me into the room, and Joseph was still not stabilized. You know, you never know how you're going to react in that moment, but when you walk into a hospital room and your child is laying there lifeless and they're working on him, that is just not something you can visualize. And when you do, it's just, I could not watch, honestly. So I went into the room next door. There were nurses with me. My husband comes in the middle of all this. And the nurses were going back and forth. And at one point, I remember the nurse saying, your son is very sick. He's a very sick little boy. They have restored his heart rate, but it's at 200 beats per minute. And, you know, it's not good.
Yeah.
In the next couple minutes, the attending doctor came into the room, and she was sobbing. And I knew as soon as I saw her in the doorway, I put my arm out, kind of like almost to push her away. And I just said, did he die? Did he die? And she said, I need you to come in the room with me. And she literally led me by the hand into the room. And there was a nurse giving Joseph chest compressions. And the doctor looked at me and she said, I need you to talk to him. I think she knew at that moment that they were doing everything modern medicine could do, and that she needed this little boy's mother to talk to him if there was going to be any chance. And so I held Joseph's hand and I talked to him. And by that time, they had been working on him for over 30 minutes. They worked on him for about 10 minutes more. And she just turned to me and said, I am so sorry. Oh. And I mean, nothing can prepare you for that. Nothing can prepare you for watching your child lose his life right in front of your eyes. And I know I'm being a bit graphic in sharing this, but you know, this is what flu did to my son. Mm-hmm. You know, and afterwards, I talked with the doctor. We met with the doctors, including his pediatrician group, several times afterwards, because I said, we need to figure out what happened. Yeah. You know, and the cause of Joseph's death is complications of H1N1 influenza. And like I said a couple minutes ago, I never realized how dangerous flu was. But I knew very quickly after losing Joseph that I needed to do something about it, that I needed to share my story, that I needed to get involved in an organization like Families Fighting Flu, because I need to help prevent this from happening to other families.
That is just heartbreaking, and we mourn with you, and I'm grateful that you feel that it's important enough to share Joseph's story. So thank you for sharing that. I know that even 10 years later, it's hard I can tell, you know, what a toll it takes on you to have to put yourself back there and retell it. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So talk to us more about what the complication was for Joseph, and kind of what they were able to find out for him, and
Sure.
his body and how it had reacted to the H1N1.
Yeah, well, that's an important point, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I think we, as the general public, and even, you know, people in the healthcare profession, tend to think of flu as a respiratory disease, which it is, there's no doubt. It's the secondary complications that flu can cause that can be so catastrophic. And what happened with Joseph in particular is, obviously he had the pneumonia, but the flu virus got into his intestinal tract, and his official cause of death is he had a catastrophic rupture of his intestinal tract, specifically his duodenum, which is that first part in your intestinal tract there. And what happened is it was eroding away from the inside out. So none of the tests that they were doing in the hospital caught that. And in fact, afterwards, you know, after we got the autopsy results and realized this is what happened, he literally suffered a catastrophic rupture, 1/4 of an inch, as a result of flu. And my one question as a parent was, my gosh, what test didn't we do? Not that I was looking to blame, you know, the hospital staff and the medical professionals. I think all of them, they are doing a labor of love. They did the best that they can. We're all human. So it wasn't about finding fault, but again, it was, let's learn what happened so that we now have that additional piece of information looking forward. And what they said to me afterwards is the only way they would have known this was happening in Joseph's intestinal tract is if they had scoped him. And they said, you know, why would we traditionally scope a child with pneumonia and the flu? It's just not common protocol. And that's one thing that I will tell you, you know, my story is not unique. There are so many other stories that we as an organization, Families Fighting Flu, share, and no two of them are exactly the same. You know, I kind of equate the flu virus as like this missile. It gets into your body, it bounces around, and we cannot predict how it's going to affect someone. And that's the scary thing about flu. The majority of people are going to get flu, be really sick, but thankfully recover. But obviously there's a lot of children, including healthy children like Joseph, a lot of healthy adults as well, seniors included, pregnant women, that we just can't tell, but they can suffer severe complications. And there's really no way for us to point at an individual and go, that person, because they're otherwise healthy, are particularly susceptible.
Yeah.
Obviously, if someone is immunocompromised, if they have asthma or diabetes, obviously they have a higher risk. But I think that's the concerning thing about flu, is that we can never predict how one individual is going to be affected by this virus.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's so important that you share how Joseph was affected. I have my 3-year-old he has asthma, and the doctors have really emphasized the importance of it. So in my layperson mind, I've always kind of equated, okay, any complications would be respiratory. And when I read Joseph's story, I thought, oh my goodness, like that never would have been something that I would have known or, thought could be a complication.
Exactly.
And so I think it's really important that you're sharing this complication, and that it's not something that is just unique to kind of the respiratory, parts of your body and those systems.
Exactly. And there's a lot of our other stories that illustrate just that, children and adults who have had, severe heart-related complications. So yes, absolutely. We just cannot tell. And I think that's the scary thing, is all the secondary complications that flu can cause.
Yeah. Wow. It's incredible what this virus can do. So,
Yes.
so a big mission of Families Fighting Flu is to stress the importance of the flu vaccine. So tell us why the flu vaccine is so important, to start out. And because, I know that in a lot of mom groups I'm in, online, there's, people say, oh, we never get the flu shot, I'm scared of it. I hear a lot of that. So just kind of give us kind of the introduction to the flu vaccine,
Sure.
and then we'll kind of walk through some questions that we have about that.
Sure, absolutely. Happy to do so. So, bottom line, annual flu vaccination is our best defense against the flu. And, certainly practicing healthy habits is important, all of that. But there is no replacement for flu vaccination. And I've heard, and I continue to hear so often, from adults specifically, I'm young, I'm healthy, I'm strong, I've never had the flu. And I'm like, great, you've been lucky. But that doesn't guarantee that next season, you won't fall victim to it. So
Right.
I think the way I like to think about it is, number one, it helps protect us as individuals, right? Even if we are strong, healthy adults, we can fall prey to the flu, and it's really important each and every year that we get a vaccine. But another thing that may not be top of mind for people is a concept called community immunity. And what that means is, vaccination doesn't just help protect you. It helps protect your loved ones, your family, your neighbors, other people that you come into contact within your community. Because if you think about it, you could be transmitting the flu virus. You could be one of those lucky people who, you carry the virus, but maybe you're not severely affected. Maybe you get kind of sick, but not severely sick. But you could then transmit that virus to somebody. Say you're standing in the grocery line, and there's somebody behind you who you don't know, but maybe they're going through cancer treatment and they're immunocompromised. Or there's an elderly person who just by nature of their age is immunocompromised. You could transmit that virus to somebody else, and they could have catastrophic results.
Yeah.
When I talk about Joseph's case, I talk about, I don't know who his patient zero is. I don't know who gave Joseph the flu virus. I will never know, and it wouldn't help me today even if I did know. It wouldn't change his story. But the bottom line is, he got the flu virus from somebody. So when I think about getting my annual flu vaccine every year, I don't do it just to make sure that I don't get down and out with the flu. I do it to help protect my husband, to help protect my daughter, to help protect my neighbors and my community members. I view it as a responsibility to myself and others. So that's really how I want other people to think about it. Because, I know we all tend to be self-centered. Guilty as charged. I do it too. We tend to think about ourselves, but I really encourage people to think about others. And I know that's hard sometimes because obviously, first and foremost, we should and probably are concerned about ourselves and our families, but think about others. The more people that are vaccinated in a community, the less chance the disease has to spread. So that's really the concept. And another analogy I like to use pretty frequently when I talk about flu vaccination, specifically with parents, is a seatbelt. I think all of us as parents expect our children, if they're old enough, to get in the car and buckle themselves. Or if they're young, we're putting them in a car seat, we're buckling them in. I bet most parents do that without a second thought. Why do we do that? To help protect them. The same thing goes for flu vaccination. So I really encourage people to think of it like that. Put flu vaccination on your checklist each and every year is just another thing. You're going back to school shopping, you're buckling your child in the seatbelt, you're, holding their hand when you cross the street, you're making them wear their bike helmet when they're riding their bike on the street. I want everybody to really put flu vaccination in that same category. We're trying to help protect ourselves and our children. So it's a no-brainer. Like I said, it's the best defense that we have.
Wow. Yeah, that's so powerful to think of it, not only just for yourself, but that kind of community or herd immunity, outlook, and thinking about, a 4-month-old baby who can't get a vaccine, or somebody's baby or grandmother or other folks who just can't, receive the vaccine. And now clarify for us, so that people kind of understand with Joseph's story, is it right that the vaccine just wasn't yet available in your area when he got sick? Okay.
Yeah, so let me explain that a little bit, because Joseph's story is unique in the fact that it was during the H1N1 pandemic. So the way the seasonal flu vaccine works is the World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, they're doing global year-round monitoring on the circulating flu strains. So every year they predict based on data. They don't just throw a dart at a dartboard and guess at it. There's actual data behind this and monitoring and surveillance. They choose the 3 or 4 strains that are going into the seasonal flu vaccine every year. Well, we know flu viruses, change very quickly. They are able to mutate very quickly. So some years they predict pretty well and the flu vaccine is well matched. Some years it's not. So with Joseph's year, 2009, he had the seasonal flu vaccine, but the pandemic strain of H1N1 was not in the seasonal flu vaccine that year. Although Joseph had his seasonal flu vaccine, he, like everybody else, basically had no protection against the pandemic H1N1 strain. So when the pandemic came into the United States, what they did is they released what's called a monovalent vaccine, meaning that it contained one strain, and that one strain was the pandemic H1N1 strain. Unfortunately, where we lived at the time, which was near Dayton, Ohio, the monovalent H1N1 pandemic flu vaccine did not become available in our community until 2 weeks after Joseph died.
Oh, goodness.
And 2 weeks after Joseph died, I was standing in a line at my county health department to get my daughter that monovalent flu vaccine to protect her against the pandemic strain of H1N1. Yeah. So
wow,
it's a little convoluted, but hopefully that clarifies things.
No, that definitely helps.
Flu vaccines, I understand there's a lot of science behind it, and sometimes people, it can be confusing, and I absolutely appreciate that. And that's why we always at Families Fighting Flu welcome people to ask questions, because we want to clarify that type of information for them.
Absolutely. So what are just a couple of the most common misconceptions that you have kind of caught on to from people who are asking those questions?
Misconceptions about the flu vaccine in general, or flu?
Either
or
one.
Both.
Or both. Yeah, either one. Whatever's helpful.
Yes. So probably one that rises to the top in regards to the flu vaccine is people think if I get the flu vaccine, it'll cause me to get the flu.
I've heard people say that. Yeah.
Categorically, emphatically, no, that cannot happen, and here's why. The flu vaccine contains viruses that are either A, inactivated, meaning they are dead viruses, or B, weakened, attenuated viruses, or some of them, technology being the wonderful thing that it is, contain no flu virus at all. So it is biologically impossible for the flu vaccine to give you the flu. Wow. So that's usually number one, is people say, oh, I got the flu vaccine and then I got the flu. And that can happen because, number one, people sometimes have what we call an immune response to vaccination, meaning that sometimes your arm might get a little sore, tender. Maybe you feel a little, feverish or warm. Basically, and that doesn't always happen, but some people do. And what that means is actually a good thing. It means your body is having an immune response, and that means that your body is building up that immunity that it needs to help fight the flu. Now, people confuse that little, I feel achy for a day or so with having the flu. Believe me, if you have the flu, you will know. You will feel like you were hit by a truck. You will be sick for the better part of a week or more. There will be no question. The flu is not just a bad cold. And I think that's what people think. I feel extra yucky, so this must be flu. There's no mistaking flu when you get it. Like I said, I had flu once in my life. It was in the year 2000. And I am not saying this just because of the conversation we're having. I can honestly tell you it was the sickest I have ever been in my life. I was incapacitated on my couch for over a week. It was awful. So, people need to understand that, again, your immune response is a good thing. And another thing I'll throw out there is, people should not wait to get vaccinated until flu starts circulating in their community. It takes your body about 2 weeks to build up that immunity it needs. So that's why we really encourage people to get vaccinated earlier in the season before flu starts circulating. That said, if they miss the boat, it falls off the radar, that's okay. It doesn't matter if it's Thanksgiving or Christmas and they're like, darn it, I didn't get my flu vaccine this year. There's still time. Later in the season, vaccination is still beneficial. But, it's good to be proactive if you can.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with you about, it when you have it, and it will be the sickest you've ever felt. Actually in 2009, I was finishing law school, and it was May. So, it should have been kind of the end of, I guess, you tell me, but, it was warm. It was like hot outside. I live in North Carolina. It was hot outside. And I was so sick, and I finally went into the doctor because I thought, my body has never felt like this before. And I actually tested positive for A and B at the same time. And I remember the doctor looking at me kind of, like just straight in the eye and saying, do you even feel like you can drive back home? Because I was just so out of, I was kind of out of it. And they said, you've got to get on Tamiflu right away. And if you start to feel any worse, you need to go straight to the hospital. And it was scary, but that was 2009. So we kind of, we talked about kind of what was going on that year, but to have both at the same time, it's just, I think even with just one strain, I know I've heard people say, it had me down for, a couple of weeks, and, I couldn't really, do any of my normal activities.
Exactly.
So is it true that the vaccine, you can still get the flu, but you will not be as sick as if you didn't get the flu.
Correct. So we know the flu vaccine isn't perfect. Nothing in life is, right? So I don't want people to get hung up on, well, it's not 100% that I won't get sick. I want people to think of it this way. If you get vaccinated, chances are you won't be hospitalized or die. Because, we need to talk about the outcomes. So when you get vaccinated against the flu, you're really helping to protect yourself not only against illness, but also against flu-related hospitalization and flu-related death. And we know that, for hospitalization and death, there are a multitude of studies out there that have proven that flu vaccination reduces your chances of flu-related hospitalization and death. So yes, there is still a small chance that you get vaccinated, especially if it's a year where perhaps the vaccine isn't well matched. You may still get sick. But the good news is you survive, I've heard doctors, say about patients who come in and say, oh, doc, I got the flu vaccine like you told me to, but I still got sick. And they laughingly say, well, at least you're here to tell me about it.
Yeah. Wow.
So I think we need to remember that it's not just illness that we're trying to prevent here. It's also those other severe outcomes that we're trying to prevent.
Absolutely. So I kind of referenced this, when I said, it was hot outside, I thought it was the end of flu season, and then Joseph got sick in October. Is there an official timeline for flu season?
Oh, if it were only that simple.
Oh.
if the flu virus only cooperated like that, it
with
would
the calendar.
be lovely. Unfortunately, no. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, we kind of put a parameter on it and say, September, October, it can start, but it can go as late as May. But I will tell you, those edges are really bleeding together. I've been kind of in this flu space for almost 10 years now. And it seems like there's been years when flu season is starting earlier and earlier and ending later and later. And even this past summer, I've heard kind of random accounts of people having flu over the summer. Now, some of those people traveled internationally. So they were in the Southern Hemisphere, they got on a plane, they came back here, and here it is summer and they have flu. So the only thing we can predict about flu is that it's going to be unpredictable.
Yeah.
That's the only thing we can say about it. So unfortunately, flu virus knows no calendar. It does what it wants when it wants. But yes, normally we kind of have our ears perked, starting in September, October. But sometimes flu activity won't start really surging until January, February. So every season is a little bit different, but if we were going to put some dates on it, I would say September to May.
Yeah. Plus or minus, right?
Plus or minus,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, plus or minus. So is it above 6 months old? Is that the kind of the starting point for eligibility for the flu vaccine?
Yes. So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommendation is for everyone 6 months and older. And by everyone, we mean 6 months to 100 plus, doesn't matter. If you're, walking around and breathing, you need a flu vaccine.
Okay.
That is the recommendation because like I said, even healthy adults and children can be adversely impacted. So, there are rare exceptions, and certainly we encourage people to talk to their healthcare professional. There are, people that may have what we call a contraindication, meaning that they cannot receive a flu vaccine for some medical reason. So obviously, we want people to talk to their trusted healthcare professional about that. But the recommendation is for everyone 6 months and older, yes.
Okay. And is there an efficacy difference between I've heard about the mist, is that right? Or something through the nose and then the shot?
Well, that's a loaded question. Let me see if I can answer it in a basic way without going down a rabbit hole and talking too much science, too much high level science.
Okay.
So the flu vaccines that are available to us are the flu shot, which I think most of us are familiar with, which is the injectable, right? There also is and has been available on the market flu mist, which is a lot of people refer to it as the nasal spray. You might also hear it by the trade name flu mist. So both of those are out. They are licensed by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. And there are a lot of different kinds of flu vaccines. So when we're talking about flu shots, there's a lot of different kinds. I won't go down a rabbit hole, like I said, and explain all of them. But in terms of effectiveness, the important thing for everyone is to remember, get vaccinated. You know, your healthcare professional can tell you if they think one would work better for you over another. At Families Fighting Flu, we don't talk about brands or products. We just want you to get vaccinated. You know, sometimes the limitation may be what's available in your community. You know, you may go, whether it's your pharmacy or your doctor's office or pharmacy may have a particular kind of flu vaccine, and that by just nature of the beast might be the one that's available to you and the one you get. But they all are relatively, you know, in terms of effectiveness, they're kind of all on the same benchmark without, again, talking about vaccine effectiveness, because I think that is a complex issue to discuss. Again, I just want people to understand, get vaccinated, don't get sick, don't get hospitalized, don't die. That's the important take-home message.
Nope, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah. And the nasal spray is licensed for children 2 years up through people aged 49 years. So again, that's a conversation you should be having with your trusted healthcare professional, whether that's your doctor, your pharmacist, what have you. But just do it.
Yep,
you know, just
absolutely.
like Nike says, just do it.
Just do it. Just do it. However you can get it with the agreement of your doctor. Just do it.
Exactly.
That's great. So, as far as, you know, the challenge that exists with the accuracy of the flu vaccine from year to year, and you know, that being an argument that some folks make, you know, in terms of, you know, well, I heard it's only, you know, 60% accurate this year.
Yep.
Are there any advancements being made with kind of flu research and the flu vaccine development that you're aware of?
Yes. So first, let me address the first part of what you brought up, the effectiveness. Like I said, that's a complex issue. There's a lot of data, and it all boils down to one data point and one number. And people get hung up on that number. And what they don't understand is there's a lot of other numbers. The important thing, again, is that that's our best defense. Another point I will make is if you don't get vaccinated, you have zero protection. So anywhere upwards from zero, you're moving in the right direction.
Right.
So we can talk about, well, it was only 40% or it was only 38%. Those numbers are still above zero. And if you don't get a vaccine, your number is zero. So, you know, kind of, I just want people to understand that's the context I want you to think about. In terms of research, yes, there's a lot of research going on in terms of flu vaccines. Like I said earlier, we know the flu vaccine is not perfect, but we do know what is currently available to us saves lives. There is no question. The science shows us that it saves lives. So what they're working on right now, and thank goodness for all the scientists and researchers out there that are doing this work, and there are a lot of people working on it, believe me when I tell you. The holy grail is to have what they call a universal flu vaccine. And what that means is, ideally, and this is years off, they're going to come up with a vaccine that will protect you against all the different strains of flu. That is no small task. Because there are a multitude of different flu strains. So when we talk about the flu virus, there's not just one flu virus out there. There's a lot of different ones, and they're constantly changing. So that's what makes it so hard. And that's why we don't yet have a universal flu vaccine, because it's so hard to keep up with these flu viruses. So they're actively working on it. there has been definitely some promise in that area, but I don't want people to hang their hat on it and go, oh, I'll get the flu vaccine when they come out with that universal one, because likely we will be still waiting for several years before we see that happen.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want people to lose sight of what's currently available to us, right?
Yeah,
Because what we have right now is still life-saving. So
absolutely. And,
kudos to the researchers, but
no kidding. That is, like you said, no small task. But it sounds like things are moving in, a positive direction,
Exactly.
even from where we are now with what it's doing to save lives. So that's great.
Yes.
So some of the questions I got on Instagram when I posed to my Instagram community, what questions would moms out there have for you? A lot of the questions revolved around, I have family members or close friends who will be around my child or my baby or my family, and they don't believe in getting vaccinated. So how can I approach this conversation? You've shared so much here that I feel like moms can take to those conversations, but is there anything else you'd add if you were with a mom who was kind of having some angst about approaching someone that they love and care about, in order to try to kind of convince them about getting a flu vaccine?
Right. So first and foremost, I'm a parent myself, and I understand that difficult situation. I've been there myself. Believe it or not, I myself have had those difficult conversations with some of my family members, even after Joseph died, asking them, did you get your flu vaccine? And they're like, no. And I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? So I understand that's a difficult conversation to have. As a parent, especially if I was a parent with little ones still at home, you got to do what's best to help protect your child. And if it comes down to, you have to say, all right, if you're not going to get a vaccine, then I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to come over and see Mary, because I'm not comfortable with that.
Yeah. See you in June, right?
Exactly. I would say as a parent, like, stand your ground. You know how important it is. In the way I always try to enter these conversations with people who are what I would refer to as vaccine hesitant. And it doesn't mean that they're anti-vaccination. It just means they have questions or concerns, or like you said, maybe they don't believe in it. I don't ever encourage people to be judgmental or confrontational in those types of conversations. It's just being consistent in the dialogue.
Yeah.
Saying, hey, just hypothetically, if it's your in-laws, hey, Mom, this is really important to me. And let me share with you what I've learned about flu and why flu vaccination is so important. And I'm sure that you don't want to endanger your grandchild, so just educating them so that they feel they're empowered. Because I think, as human beings, we don't want to be told what to do, right? I don't like being told what to do. People generally don't. So the way I always approach my conversations is I'm trying to empower them. I'm trying to feed them as much knowledge and information as I can so that they can then feel empowered to make that decision. And if you have that conversation and if you make those efforts, and they still refuse to get vaccinated, then I think it's fully within your right as a parent to say, I'm sorry, then I'm not going to allow you to be around my children because you're endangering them, because unfortunately that's what it comes down to. And I think that's kind of a strong word, and I'm, it's not my favorite word to use, but again, kind of going back to Joseph's story, somebody was his patient zero, and I think as a parent, whatever we're talking about, our primary job is to help protect our kids, and we have to do whatever is necessary. So, just like I would tell my in-laws to buckle my child in if they were taking them somewhere in the car, same kind of goes for flu vaccination. So, again, Families Fighting Flu is here to be a resource to help you have those conversations, to give you the information that you need to have those difficult conversations. But I would say, stand strong as a parent. And you have to respect people, and if they really dig their heels in and they don't want to do it, that's fine, but you can at least control who's around your children.
Yeah, that's really important. And I love your perspective and your approach, and I think it's respectful and loving, but yet still firm. So thank you for sharing that. Is as we think about, the folks who in our communities who can't get vaccines for flu and for other things, for, a variety of reasons, like you said, they are contraindicated. What are, if somebody listening has maybe a child who can't get a vaccine, obviously this is a conversation that they need to have with their physician. But does Families Fighting Flu have kind of alternative, suggestions for folks who can't get a vaccine?
As far as trying to insulate that individual, do you mean?
Right. Or just, prevention. Like, are there any other prevention methods for the flu other, obviously,
Sure.
general cleanliness and
Right,
and the
right.
vaccine, but is there anything else that's out there that is supported by Families Fighting Flu?
Yeah, I mean, number one is always flu vaccination. But to your point, to answer your question, if for some reason that can't happen, definitely practicing healthy habits, especially during the flu season. That means washing your hands frequently, using hand sanitizer if, soap and water isn't readily available, doing the elbow cough or, sneezing into your elbow to try to not broadcast your germs everywhere. Staying home if you're sick. I used to work in an office environment. And I can distinctly remember, like people in the next office over, like coming to work and they're coughing and sneezing. Don't do that. Stay home if you're ill.
Yes, we don't want you
spread
here.
your germs around. Yeah. So definitely practicing healthy habits at home, at work, just trying your best. I'm not saying go crazy, and you're disinfecting every surface you come into contact with, because we also have to be realistic. But, just during flu season, be cognizant of it. Like in my household, it's very routine. And my daughter even knows, even though she's 17, she's been well trained. When we come home, no matter where we've been, we go straight to the sink, we wash our hands with soap and water. Like that is just something we do out of habit.
Yeah.
So definitely there's other measures, in addition to vaccination that you can take to help prevent, your exposure to the flu.
That's great. I think that that's helpful. And I think, two of the most impactful things you just said there are, to wash your hands when you come home and to not go to work or send your kids to school or daycare too soon. I know it's hard as a working mom.
Sure.
Because you're like, I've been out for, a week. I got to get back to work. They seem fine, but that's how it ends up spreading like crazy through a daycare or school.
Exactly. We like to call those little children, the spreaders. And unfortunately, that's usually where it starts, and I kind of think of back to school time. It's almost like you cringe because you're like, oh gosh, what bugs are going to start going around now? But I mean, it's true. We have to kind of be even more vigilant at those times.
Absolutely. So you've shared so many helpful statistics as we've spoken and so many helpful tips. Is there anything that I haven't asked about that you think is important to share, either in terms of tips or prevention or just kind of general statistics?
Yeah, well, let me talk about some statistics. And I, as a scientist, I love my statistics. I love data. I'm kind of a nerd that way. And, at Families Fighting Flu, we put a face on the flu. That the core of our organization is our family stories. And we know that's what resonates with people. But I would like to share just a few statistics because I think they are alarming, and it's not something that, comes up generally in conversation, but it just kind of to illustrate the burden of flu. During the 2017-18 flu season, 80,000 people died in the U.S. from flu. And when I've said that number before, people will literally like stop me and go, "I'm sorry, did you say 8,000?" And I'm like, no, 80,000 people in 1 year in the United States. So, this last flu season, the CDC has estimated upwards of 60,000 people lost their lives. So this is every year. Every year, millions of people are getting flu. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people are being hospitalized, and thousands, if not tens of thousands of people are losing their lives. This is the burden of flu. And, it's so ironic because when we talk about flu, it's like, oh, it's just the flu. But flu is the deadliest vaccine preventable disease we have. Obviously I'm all for vaccination. If there's a vaccine for it, go get it.
Yep.
But flu, I don't think people truly understand the numbers,
Yeah.
And so even people who are, oh, I'll go get the MMR, I'll get the DTaP, I'll do this, I'll do that. Oh, but I don't want the flu vaccine. And it always astounds me because I'm like, that is really what we should be worried about.
Yeah.
Not that we're not worried about the other stuff. We need to be worried about all of it. But the numbers are just, it's hard to wrap your brain around it. And the statistic globally is 650,000 people every year lose their lives to flu.
Oh my goodness.
So
wow.
It's almost inconceivable to wrap your head around those numbers.
Yeah.
But, the unfortunate thing is one is too many.
Yes.
When I see those numbers and I watch them through the flu season, because pediatric flu deaths are reportable. So CDC every week will report on the pediatric flu deaths. And every time I see that number tick up, for me, it's not a number. It's an empty chair at a table.
Yeah.
It's a family. It's a community. I can't even put into words the effects of that one number. I mean, my life will never be the same. I have an empty chair that I look at every single night. And it's awful. And there are so many people, families that are part of this organization that made a conscious decision not to vaccinate. And the worst thing possible happened. And I don't want anybody to have to live with that, So the statistics are alarming. And it's just what we do is try to prevent this from happening to other families. Yeah. And even from an economic standpoint, flu costs the U.S. economy $87 billion every year.
Wow.
When we talk about, like you mentioned earlier, children missing school, parents missing work, all of that adds up. So there's an economic burden as well that goes along with flu. So it's a public health issue, but it's also an economic one. So it really, just all points back to the same thing, that we all need to get vaccinated. Flu is just so dangerous. And like I said earlier, I never realized the impact of influenza. And, all of us that are part of this organization share our stories so that hopefully we just keep reaching people that, we don't want to watch those numbers every year because it's heartbreaking, whether it's a child, an adult, a senior, the fact that every year we're watching these numbers, again, that's an empty chair. That's a family member, and it's just heartbreaking.
Absolutely. It really is. Does the CDC release information on what percentage of those deaths were unvaccinated? Is that something that's tracked?
Yes, it is. So generally speaking, about 80% of the children that lose their lives to influenza were not vaccinated.
Okay.
And so, like I said earlier, we know the flu vaccine is not perfect. There certainly are instances where, a child may have been vaccinated but still lost their lives. And that really leads us back to the conversation of community immunity.
Yeah.
We need to protect our communities. We need to protect public health. And the way we do that is the majority of people have to be vaccinated. Yep. It's just insulating that. So, unfortunately, those are the statistics. That does happen, but the majority of adverse events are in people, in children and adults who were not vaccinated.
Yeah. Wow. Those are powerful numbers. That is for sure.
Yes.
Wow. So as we start to wrap up, I've been thinking through this episode, just how this information over the last 10 years and how raw this, I can tell, still is for you in terms of, the loss that your family experienced. But every year it's like, here it comes again, another flu season and another reminder. And you work for the organization, as the COO, and you're hearing these statistics, like you said, to you, it's not a number, it's another story of a family. One question that comes to mind for you, and this is I think it's a personal question, so I recognize that, but how have you managed to take care of yourself through this work and, make sure that you're not that you're not still hurting and, still struggling with your family's loss, but how have you been able to continue to lean into these numbers and these real stories when you've experienced such heartache, from this yourself?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I could lie and say that I'm really good at it, but
Yeah.
I will be honest, there are tough days. It's
Yeah.
tough when you have lost a child to flu and you're doing this day in and day out. There are some days, some weeks where, it's Friday evening and I will look at my husband and say, if I hear the word flu over the weekend, like I'm going to lose it, because it's like Groundhog's Day, and you said
Right.
like,
That's
oh,
what I'm
here comes
thinking. Yeah.
another flu season. It's like Groundhog's Day, but I'll tell you what motivates me. And some days, I will be honest, it's really hard to come to my desk because dealing with flu is tough, it's frustrating, it's depressing, it's heartbreaking. But what keeps me going is what I said earlier. I want to help prevent this from happening to another family. So I almost get a little bit angry about it. I kind of pump myself up by getting angry at the flu.
Yep.
And I'm like, you know what? I've got to do everything I can because I can make a difference every day. And I say that, and sometimes it sounds cliche, but I tell other people this too. We all have the power to save somebody's life.
Yeah.
With a simple conversation. Think about, you're in the store, you hear somebody talking about, oh, I don't know if I'm going to go get my flu vaccine. You turn to them and you just in a mere couple minutes share what you know. Oh my gosh, I was thinking the same thing, but then I learned this, and this about flu, and I heard Joseph's story, and now, oh my gosh, I get the flu vaccine every year. You may never know, but you may have just motivated someone to get vaccinated and consequently saved a life.
Yes.
And that is literally the way I think about it every day. And when I go around and I talk to people, that is what I say. I say, every day I come to my desk, it's life or death. And I might be having a bad day and I might have to take a time out and cry for 5 minutes because I'm dealing with something that's super emotional at that particular moment. Maybe I'm talking to another mom and I can just identify with her. But then I have to pull up my bootstraps and go, what I am doing is so important. What we are all doing is so important. And we are saving lives. And we might never know how many lives we save, but we all have the capacity to do so.
Yeah.
So I think that's really what gets me through the day. And it's kind of like a mixture of anger and sadness and empowerment and everything rolled together. But you kind of have to work through the tough days. And certainly there are days when I have to rely on other people and take a little time out because I will say this is the hardest job I've ever done in my life. It is probably the hardest job I will ever do. I kind of laugh when I think back to my work as an environmental scientist and I go, oh, I thought I was stressed then. Oh, that was nothing.
It's all about perspective.
Exactly. And some days I feel like I have the weight of the world on my shoulders because I really do feel like if I stop doing what I'm doing, people are going to die. Yeah. And I know, again, that's cliche, but that's the way I look at it. So I am not the best about the work-life balance. It's something that I definitely need to improve, and I'll get there someday. But I just know what we're doing is so important.
Yeah. Well, thank you for showing up for it, even on, and letting other people carry you on the days that are especially hard. And I think that's to be expected, when this is in your face every day after, what your family has gone through. But it's just incredible what the organization is doing. So can you tell us a little bit more about where to find the resources that Families Fighting Flu provides, and just how people can kind of reach out and learn more and follow the organization online?
Absolutely. So our website is familiesfightingflu.org. We've got a ton of information on our website about flu as a disease, flu vaccination for all different age groups. We've got educational materials. We've got a library of family stories that you can go on and read. On our website, you can actually reach out to us through email. You can sign up for our weekly flu news, which comes out every week on Mondays during the flu season. We also have a quarterly newsletter. And one thing I'd like to say is anyone is welcome to be part of this organization. It's not just families who have been personally affected. We have a lot of volunteers and advocates who are just passionate about flu awareness, prevention, what have you. Maybe they're, in the healthcare field, maybe not. So we are an equal opportunity organization, shall I say. So If you're interested in raising awareness within your local community, definitely reach out to us. That's something that we can help you with. But hopefully, if people just have questions, they can find some information on our website, or certainly reach out to us via email. Happy to engage with them on an individual level and address, any questions they might have. We are active on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We have a YouTube channel. So definitely I would encourage people to engage with us, follow us. We really are just trying to be that go-to resource for people, so that they can get the information that they need. We're just regular people like everybody else. We're moms, we're dads, we're aunts, uncles, sisters, brothers, and we just want to make sure people get the information that they need in an easily understandable way. Because we understand, certainly we're not trying to replace the CDC or healthcare professionals. We are just complementing them. But I think too, we try our best to really communicate with people, in that kind of personalized way, so that they can really get that information and understand it, because sometimes people will say, well, I was online and looking for this information and I found it, but I still don't understand it. So definitely here to serve as a resource for people like that.
Yeah, I love that. And I will say, I think I said this to you before we were recording, but I'll say it now that we are recording. I have been following the organization online on social media now for a few weeks. And, since finding the organization and reaching out, and the information and statistics and, resources that are provided via social media are just incredible. And it's not an alarmist approach. It's just a very helpful approach in terms of, oh yeah, I need to remember that, or just kind of a constant reminder in the back of my mind that, okay, as soon as my doctor's office says they have the flu shots, we need to go get them. And so that time doesn't get away from us either. So lots of statistics and resources are certainly being shared there, and it's a great resource for our community of families and moms. So, and dads, of course, but yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Cerise, for sharing your story and for the work that you're doing, and for just being such an incredible resource for so many families who, are on probably all ends of the spectrum with the flu. Maybe they've never had it. Maybe they've had a tragedy like yours, and probably everywhere in between. But y'all are doing great work, and thank you for taking this on as a life accomplishment that you've had in terms of making a difference. So great work that y'all are doing.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my story and that other information.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Cerise. I'm so thankful for the moms who share their stories on here on the show and in our fun Instagram community. I'd love for you to connect with me online at Influential Motherhood on Instagram and Facebook to continue the conversation, or just say hello. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star rating and a written review in the Apple Podcast app. It's how you can help get the show in front of moms looking for episodes just like this one. I hope you'll find a way to influence your work or community for good this week. Don't forget, you can listen to other episodes or learn more about the show at www.influentialmotherhood.com. See you next week.